Have you ever wondered how one military campaign could change the course of a war, even when it's deemed a failure? Let's cast our minds back to the late 60s, a period of unrest and upheaval, and focus on a key event, the Tet Offensive during the Vietnam War. This event, though initially seen as a defeat, dramatically shifted the tides of the war. It's a tale of strategy, surprise, and the undeniable strength of human spirit. Today we unravel the twists and turns of the Tet Offensive. January 30th, 1968, a day that marked the beginning of one of the largest military campaigns of the Vietnam War. This was the start of the Tet Offensive, a series of surprise attacks by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong against South Vietnam and its allies. The Tet Offensive was named so because it began during the Tet holiday, Vietnam's most important holiday, which celebrates the Lunar New Year. This military campaign was a concerted effort that took place over several months, from late January until September of that same year. It involved more than 80,000 troops striking more than 100 towns and cities across South Vietnam. The offensive left a significant impact on the Vietnam War, causing widespread shock and questioning the progress and cost of the conflict among the American public and political circles. The Tet Offensive, a military failure but a strategic victory, was a turning point in the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive unfolded over several phases, each with its unique strategic significance. Our journey through the chronology of the Tet Offensive begins in the early morning hours of January 31st, 1968. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a series of surprise attacks which marked the start of the first phase. This initial attack was designed to strike a psychological blow to the South Vietnamese and their American allies, disrupting military command and control throughout South Vietnam. The second phase, often referred to as the May Offensive, kicked off on May 4th, with the North Vietnamese forces launching fresh attacks against 36 of the 44 provincial capitals and 5 of the 6 autonomous cities. This phase was a clear demonstration of the enemy's resilience and determination, despite the heavy losses suffered during the first wave of attacks. Following this, the third phase, also known as the Phase of Resolve, commenced on August 17th. This phase was characterized by large-scale conventional battles, as the North Vietnamese forces aimed to inflict maximum damage on the South Vietnamese and American forces. This phase exhibited a shift in the enemy's strategy from guerrilla warfare to conventional fighting. The fourth and final phase, which began on November 1st, was a series of offensives and counteroffensives that culminated in the Battle of Saigon. The focus of this phase was the South Vietnamese capital, Saigon, where the North Vietnamese forces aimed to capture the presidential palace and topple the South Vietnamese government. Throughout each phase, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces utilized a blend of guerrilla tactics and conventional warfare. They capitalized on the element of surprise, launching attacks during the Tet holiday when they knew their adversaries would be off guard. The Tet Offensive ended after 77 days of intense fighting, leaving a lasting impact on the Vietnam War. This offensive, marked by its surprise element and the North Vietnamese forces' tenacity, would forever change the course of the Vietnam War and indeed, the landscape of global warfare. The Tet Offensive, despite its military failure, shook the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces to their core. As we journeyed through the chronology of the Tet Offensive, we've unearthed several key points. This military campaign, launched by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong in the early hours of January 31st, 1968, was a turning point in the Vietnam War. Although it was a military failure for the North Vietnamese, the Tet Offensive had far-reaching implications that extended beyond the battlefield. Let's revisit these key points. The Tet Offensive was a strategic surprise, catching the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces off guard. Despite the heavy losses incurred by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, the campaign underscored their resilience and determination. It was a psychological victory, shaking the confidence of the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces and exposing the vulnerabilities in their defense. More importantly, the Tet Offensive had a profound impact on U.S. public opinion. The stark contrast between the U.S. government's optimistic reports and the grim reality of the war led to a shift in public sentiment, causing many to question the U.S.'s involvement in the conflict. The offensive also influenced U.S. foreign policy, leading to a de-escalation of the war and paving the way for peace negotiations. The Tet Offensive, a military campaign that changed the course of the Vietnam War, continues to be a subject of intense study and debate among historians.